Hi everyone, my name is Jessica and I am a life coach, and I am hopefully starting this YouTube channel to have a place where people can come and get information about their lives. So basically, I have good news and I want to share that good news with you. And the good news has to do with who you are, why are you here, what gives your life meaning, what motivates you specifically, what is your work, and what are your gifts. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself and my coaching practice and elaborate more on those questions that I just put forth. I'm in my, I hate to say this, but it's worth mentioning for the sake of what I'm doing here. I'm in my late 40s. And when I was in my early 20s, over 20 years ago, I set out on a quest because I noticed that a lot of people around me, the adults especially, just in the world, just people in the world, did not seem to be happy or fulfilled, or it seemed to me they were kind of just going through the motions of life. I noticed a lot of people were broke, they were sick, they weren't healthy, they seemed like they were following the path because everybody else followed the path. And a lot of those things didn't make a lot of sense to me. It seemed like a lot of people were spiritually dead. Even though I was surrounded by people who professed certain faiths and ways of life. But I really wasn't all that impressed or inspired by even just, let's just say, like my country as a whole and what people were doing and how they were living. Particularly, like I said, I didn't appreciate that people were not in healthy marriages. People were getting divorces all the time. People never seemed to have any money. People seemed to hate their jobs. People seemed to be physically unfit, not exercising, not eating well. And back when I was in my early 20s, life coaches weren't, at least they weren't a thing that I knew much about. I guess I would have probably used the word mentor, something like that. So I set out on a quest for my own life to try to decide what it would mean for me to do things differently, and what I was even trying to look to do differently. So I was able to at least discern those certain areas that I just spoke of. So it's like spirituality, health, relationships, work, finances, recreational time, personal living space, continual mental growth. That was an area that I wanted to work on. So to do this work of mine, what I was hoping to do was find a way to live that seemed to bring about some answers and some direction in these areas of life. And I knew that I couldn't just do that within a few months. And I had the sense that I would have to live a life somewhat well to have some kind of track record, because one of the things that I'm a big stickler about, and not everybody is a stickler about this, and that's okay, but the way I'm wired is I don't want to take advice from somebody in a certain area if they're not like who I want to be in that area. So somebody who's had 5 divorces, I'm not that interested in marriage advice. Right now, that they could still give you some information about what doesn't work. That's fine. But logically speaking, in any area of life, there are infinite things that don't work. Right. So I'm not really looking for what doesn't work, because that list is completely endless. What I was looking at is what are some dependable things that do work. And not everything works for all of us. So it's a little tricky, because just because something works for one person doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone. But at least if something works for one person, it means there's a chance it could work for someone else. And maybe that someone could be me. Okay, so I don't take health advice from people who, again, look really out of shape, sick, overweight, can't go up a flight of stairs without getting winded. I don't want to take financial advice from broke people. I don't want to take career advice from people who hate their jobs and hate their bosses. Okay, so my thoughts were, well, to do this, if I'm going to be a mentor of sorts, what I'm going to have to do is find some ways that work, at least on some level. And I, of course, didn't know if I could do that or not, but that was the goal. And then put those into practice. And if I get some sort of success, then come back and share that with, at the time, what I thought it would be was younger women. My coaching practice right now is actually men and women, younger and older, all ages. So it's not quite that limited as my original vision was. But this was back in the early 2000s that I started this quest. And so back then, we did have the internet, but not to the extent we did today. So basically, I just read books. So many books on things related to those topics. So how to live life, how to be happy, how to find meaning, wealth books, health books, relationship books, spiritual books, any area of life that I wanted to work on or improve on, I read books about. And I still read lots and lots of books to this day. So what happened was I did that, and I came up with these sort of frameworks with which I lived my life in. And here I am almost 25 years later, and I believe that I got some pretty good results in some of these areas. So my question for you, bringing it back, is I have good news, and I want to help you discover who you are and why you are here and what gives your life meaning and what motivates you and what are your gifts. Okay, so one of the things that I've learned along the way, which is kind of, you could probably intuit this, we're all different. So the things that bring me and my life happiness and meaning and fulfillment and that motivate me are not going to necessarily be the same types of things that motivate you. And I knew that even when I was really little. I started studying personalities. I believe I was like 10 years old. My sister bought me a book. My older sister bought me a book called Personality Plus by Florence Littauer. I think there might have been a second author. Anyway, the book was on those 4 basic temperaments. You might have heard them before: sanguine, melancholy, phlegmatic, choleric. And I loved that book because right away when I read it, I could tell that 2 of those temperaments were mine and 2 of them were not mine. And it was very curious to me that we operate so differently. So I've always had a very keen interest in personalities because I realized back when I was 10 that we're not all doing things the same way. As I grew up and I, read more and tried to figure out this, how to live a good life, it was very obvious to me that personalities and temperament were going to be relevant here, because I did notice that even the way I lived was different than how, say, my parents lived or my siblings lived or my cousins or my friends. So I also was fascinated by other personality typologies. So in my 20s, I was also interested in Myers-Briggs, for instance. I found that helpful. DISC assessment was a helpful personality typology. And even when I was trying to find my husband, my mother would always tell me that you don't want to marry, that if you and your spouse are just alike, one of you is unnecessary. And there was some truth to that. I recognized that the skill set that I brought, being my 2 temperaments, were, I had some good skills, but they were limited. And that to make sort of a full household, it might be better for me to find a partner who had 2 other sets of skills. You know what it reminds me of? I don't know if you've ever played those cooperative games that are a thing now. And if you play cooperative games, some of them have like characters. You get a character, and your character has certain superpowers that are good in certain situations. But your character's superpower can't fix every situation. It's just helpful in certain situations. So that's why it's a cooperative game, because your other teammates have other superpowers that are good in other situations. And of course, the reason we do that is because games imitate life. That really is how it is in real life. No matter who you are, you bring a certain set of skills and gifts to the table. And then your partner or your friends or your coworkers, they have different skills. And so then together, there is sort of this alchemy that happens, and the two of you together end up bringing a unique skill set. Any two blend of people brings a unique skill set to the world. So what is it that your skill set brings to the table, right? That's why I was so interested with personalities and with the temperaments. Those original 4 temperaments from that book that I got, those were discovered in ancient Greece, actually. So this is a very long time ago. People have recognized that people have different temperaments. So fast forward, I found a husband who did have, so I tested very highly in 2 of those temperaments. That's sanguine and choleric, in case you're interested. And I knew I was on a search, on the hunt to find a husband who was strong in melancholy and phlegmatic. And I found him, and we got married. Okay. But that was about as sophisticated as my personality typology was. We knew our Myers-Briggs numbers, my husband and I. But a few years into our marriage, we were introduced to the Enneagram. I'm pausing because this is a life-changing event, people. Finding the Enneagram, I cannot even explain to you how much deep diving into the Enneagram totally changed, revolutionized my life, my marriage, my relationship to my parents, to my siblings, to my friends, to my bosses at the time, to my coworkers at the time. I mean, the entire world, it's like the entire world was unlocked in a way that made sense that I never had before I had the tool of the Enneagram. Okay, so if you've never heard of it, Enneagram is a personality typology. And I mentioned that I'm a life coach. I am a life coach, but I'm an Enneagram life coach specifically. So while I do help people with just general life coach tasks, what I have found to be the most useful tool in self-discovery and growth is the Enneagram. So I am specifically an Enneagram life coach. And at this point, I have been studying the Enneagram for almost 10 years. And I started learning about it the same way that I learned about everything else, which is books. But as I started applying that personality typology, and as I started realizing how much it was changing everything, my goal sort of shifted to whatever kind of mentor I was going to be, or at this point I did have the language of life coach. I realized that an Enneagram life coach was probably going to be my game, because I don't know of any other tool that transforms your life. So I do want to say that I am a very spiritual person. I want to be upfront with you on that. I do believe in God. I believe in a good God. And part of my coaching practice for my clients who are interested does also involve some spiritual discovery. And Enneagram, the Enneagram personality typology can, and I believe at its highest use, it is also it's a spiritual typology. However, you don't have to use it at that level. So if you are the type of person who just wants to keep it psychological, you can, and it works great psychologically. It doesn't work as great as it does if you bring it to the spiritual level, but nevertheless, something is better than nothing. And look, some people don't have a spiritual practice or a spiritual belief because they just simply can't believe that stuff. It's not because they're trying not to have it. It's, a lot of people wish they could have some sort of faith or belief, but they just don't. And that's fine. You are where you are, and that's okay. So, Enneagram helps you to know who you are at your core. And the reason it is different from, well, there's a few reasons that set it apart from other types of typologies, like the ones I've mentioned. So it's not the same as Myers-Briggs, DISC assessment, the four temperaments, the one with the colors. I can't think of what it is. It's different in a few ways. So the first way I've already mentioned is it can be used for spiritual development as well. Another way that it's different from other typologies is it is a dynamic system instead of a static system. So what we mean by that is the Enneagram, first and foremost, Enneagram is a word that means a symbol with 9 points. Ennea means 9. So the image of Enneagram is a circle with 9 points around it, almost like a clock, like the face of a clock. And once you discover what your core type is, your core type is either going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. Once you discover what your core type is, the work is to see the blind spots there, the strengths there, the weaknesses there, how other people perceive you there, what your motivations look like from your core place. And believe it or not, we can divide humanity into 9 different valid ways of being human. So you don't know what you don't know. And if you've never heard anything about the Enneagram other than what I'm telling you right now, it's hard to picture this because it's so outside of our normal realm of thought. But and I don't know where there's 9 ways, right? Maybe there's 15 we'll discover in the future. I don't know. I don't know. But what I do know is the system works incredibly well. So when you find your one number, the type that's your core type, what you start learning is, even though you have a core type, you very much act like other of those numbers at different times and in different circumstances. And when you first learn Enneagram, you don't know all of the 9 types. You don't know your own type when you first learn it. So it's hard to sort of get your bearings, we'll say, on this map of human personality. But what it essentially does is it encapsulates 9 different ways of being human. And within each of those 9 ways, there are certain goals or certain things that we focus on. So your personality, and this is not just Enneagram, this is no matter what personality typology you use, human personality is formed by what you focus on. So in really rough terms, for instance, if you know the 4 temperaments, we could say something like people who come from a phlegmatic standpoint are focusing on peace and harmony. That's their highest goal in life, is peace and harmony. If you move over into the choleric space, people in choleric space are sort of focusing on strength and maybe like agency, autonomy. That's their whole focus, is strength and autonomy. So you've got peace and harmony, and then you've got strength and autonomy. And then if you move into the sanguine place, these are people who tend to be focused on having a great time, fun, enjoyment of life. So that's what they focus on primarily. And then if you move into the melancholy types, those are people who tend to be detail-oriented, a little bit more serious. Accuracy and competence is really sort of valued in the melancholy quadrant of human personality. So anyway, just with those 4 temperaments that I just described, you can see we don't all want the same things. Because you've got harmony and peace, and then you have autonomy and strength, and then you have fun and a good time, and then you have details and seriousness and perfection. And that is a very simplistic way of saying when you bring people together who lead with those different goals, we can clash because they're not necessarily always, what do I say? They're in conflict with one another. And such is life. And a lot of us, most people, there are some people who thrive in conflict, but most of us don't care for conflict. And so that's not really the best news to hear that we're all coming from different places and that those places can be in conflict with one another. But let's be real. That is real. That is literally the world we're living in. So we can fight it or we can find serenity therein. So, okay, so Enneagram is even more complex than that because there are 9 different come-froms, and the goals on each of those 9 come-froms are even more specific than the 4 simplistic ones that I just mentioned. So the reason Enneagram is a dynamic system is once you learn your core number, you learn that you have 2 other numbers to your left and to your right on the circle. Remember, I mentioned it's a drawing, is a picture. So for instance, if you're a type 4, you know how to be a type 5 and you know how to be a type 3 because 3, 4, 5. Okay, so it's dynamic because sometimes, and most of the time, if your core type is a type 4, most of the time you'll be coming out of a worldview that is based in the way a 4 sees the world. But sometimes you'll slip into how 5s see the world, which is very different than how 4s see the world. And other times, as a 4, you might slip into how a 3 sees the world. Now, before you know Enneagram, you do this just automatically. It's on autopilot. It's kind of like, sometimes people will talk about the difference between living with intention and living without intention. So if you don't have an intention for anything, for your day, for your life, for your marriage, for your finances, for your work, if you don't have an intention, what happens? Right? You're sort of just like a ship sitting in the middle of the ocean and the winds just blow you whichever way they blow you. Right? But you could also steer your ship. And steering your ship is a metaphor here for talking about having an intention. Okay, I want to go to that island over there. I'm going to steer my ship to that island. Now, you have a much better chance of getting to that island if you try to steer your ship and try to get to that island, rather than if you just let your ship sit out in the ocean and hope that the winds happen to blow you to that island. Okay, that's what we mean by intentionality. So if you come from Enneagram type 4 and you're just letting the winds blow you where they do, sometimes you'll blow into 3 territory and you'll see the world literally as a 3 does for those moments of time.